Welcome to Real Money, Real Life, the podcast where we get real about money and the messy human stuff that comes with it. I'm Linda Grizely, financial wellness speaker, personal finance educator, and creator of the Me Money Method. This is the show for people who feel behind financially and want to finally understand money and make confident decisions that work in their real life. Because money isn't just math, it's life, and you deserve to feel confident with money and good about how you spend it. If you're listening, you're one of the real ones, the ones who are strong enough to face hard transitions and wise enough to choose clarity over chaos. Divorce is not just a legal event, it's a financial and emotional turning point. And when people operate from fear, anger, or the need to win, decisions often create long-term damage. In this episode, we are going to explore collaborative law and mediation as structured, strength-based alternatives to courtroom battles. While laws may vary from state to state, we'll focus on principles and decisions and frameworks that may apply across the U.S., helping you understand how you might protect your finances, children, family, and long-term stability during one of life's most defining transitions. My guest today is Manisha Patel, who is known for combining deep legal expertise with a calm, practical, and compassionate approach that helps clients make good decisions in some of the most stressful moments of their lives. As a collaborative family law attorney, certified mediator, and founder of a boutique family law firm in Greensboro, North Carolina, Manisha focuses on helping families navigate separation, divorce, and co-parenting with less conflict and more clarity, using collaborative law and mediation to keep people out of courtroom battles whenever possible. She's an elected counselor to the North Carolina State Bar and past president of the Greensboro Bar Association, as well as a longtime leader in organizations that support women in the legal profession, pro bono service, and lawyer wellness. Her new book is End Your Marriage Peacefully, Your Guide to Successful Collaboration Divorce in North Carolina. Welcome, Manisha.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being my guest. I always like to start out with your story, so tell us what drew you to do collaborative family law instead of traditional litigation?
Yeah, well, I actually started my career out even as a student attorney in law school with a litigation focus in family law. That's all I've ever done in the legal field. And I didn't really know much other than this is how it's done, this is how people do it, and this is how I'm going to do it. And it started back in 2010, and I was always litigation focused, you versus me. I have to win for my client. That's what I was taught. That's what I felt comfortable in. And so it took a long time, over a decade of doing that. And I realized there has to be a better way. First, I was burnt out in the constant battle in court, out of court. I knew it was not helpful for my clients, especially coming out of COVID, court backlogs, waiting in limbo all these months to get in front of a judge. And I realized no one's winning here. It's not even a you versus me or I'm going to win, you're going to lose. No one was winning. And that's common in family law, but I wanted to find a way. How can we make this better? And I had been trained in collaborative family law as a form of alternative dispute resolution since 2019, but it was just a little piece of my practice. It wasn't the major focus. And I had a very high conflict and somewhat dangerous custody case where the other party was represented by a number of different attorneys, then unrepresented. There were threats made in the courthouse following me on the streets of downtown Greensboro. And I realized I can't put my own self at risk in these situations, let alone my clients. And how can I better serve the community with the way we do this? How can we do something that helps families not have the financial drain? I mean, tens of thousands of dollars. How can we help people not have such an emotional drain going on for years? The time suck, quite honestly, after months and months of court, years oftentimes. And how can we preserve these relationships for people. If you share children or you share finances at some point, your relationship business side, if that romantic relationship ends, that's going to continue. And so, how can we preserve these relationships for people's next stages in their lives? And I've realized that collaborative family law was the way. I became a certified mediator in 2022 to help with those skills, and another method of out of court form of dispute resolution. And so ever since then, I've really just shifted and focused and found that how helpful these different options are for people, for families.
Yeah, I can see that when divorce becomes adversarial, when there's a lot of friction going on, it really can affect people financially and emotionally. You mentioned some of those things already, like the time period, the toll it takes. I can see where this is a much needed thing.
Yeah.
So, tell us more about how someone might know whether they're a candidate for collaborative rather than litigation.
Yeah. So one thing I will say is there are a myriad of options most that you have to resolve your disputes. And I always say litigation is kind of like the most adversarial on that spectrum of options. And that most of the time, that's always going to be in your back pocket. That's always going to be an option. And so, knowing if litigation is going to be the right option versus mediation or collaborative family law, I think it's always going to be an option, but for a few reasons or situations. The first being domestic violence. If there's been a history of domestic violence, I will not tell my client this is a good fit because I want them to, one, be physically safe. I want them to be emotionally safe through this process. And with collaborative family law, everyone kind of comes to the proverbial and literal table versus being in court. You're at one plaintiff table, defendant table, you have a sheriff's deputy, you have a judge, all of those things. So whenever there's been some form of domestic violence or emotional abuse, I think that that's where we're going to say maybe we don't want to focus on that piece. But the other piece to know that collaborative family law might be a good option is if you want to have the control, quite honestly. This puts the decision making back in your own hands versus a stranger, which a judge is to you and your family. And so if that's something is that's really important for you, then I think collaborative family law is a very good option because it puts the control of the timeline, the decision making, how and when you make these decisions. That's all on your choices. Court, you're at the mercy of the court schedule. Quite honestly, the court will put you through their timeline. It may take 6 months, it may take 8 months. I would say nowadays a custody case from initial filing to getting in front of a judge for a permanent trial, 18 to 24 months. And that's a long time to be in limbo with your children. Um, Sometimes there are things that have to be decided long before you can get in front of a judge. So I think if you really want to have that decision making ability back in your own hands and your own timeline, I think collaborative family law is a wonderful option to resolve those issues.
Yeah, I can see that. And I want to back up just a minute for the
Yeah,
listeners and talk about, because we've named three things here, and I want you to go ahead and tell us the difference between them. And that
yeah.
is litigation, collaborative divorce, and mediation. So explain what those three things are and what the differences are.
Yeah, so I like to call it an adversarial spectrum or a dispute resolution spectrum. And on each end, you have an adversarial, I guess, setup, if you will. And on the other side of the spectrum, it is less adversarial and less positional based, but interest based. And so I would say litigation is on the most adversarial end of the spectrum. That is filing the lawsuit, having the lawsuit served, going to court, and having a judge decide how yeah, the resolution to that dispute. With mediation, I find that more so in the middle There is a mediator, a trained certified mediator, a third party neutral, someone who doesn't know you, your other partner, your separated spouse, your co-parent. Everyone has their own attorneys, or you don't not need attorneys. And then you go to a mediation session. You work through your disputes, and oftentimes it may not guarantee a resolution, but the key to that is both people have a buy-in that they want this resolved outside of a public record, outside of a judge telling them what to do. And oftentimes, mediation may be court ordered. It may be required under your state statutes. I know with North Carolina, there are situations where mediation is required by the courts. And then collaborative family law, I would say collaborative divorce all means the same thing. That is on the very other end of the adversarial spectrum, where really everyone is coming to this space in an interest space. What are the interests and goals of these people who want to have these issues resolved? Whereas litigation, you're just in your position and this is the end all be all, and I'm going to essentially fight to the death of getting my position entered by a judge, awarded by a judge. And so with collaborative family law, everyone comes to that literal and proverbial table. You have a collaborative team. Each person has a collaborative attorney. You agree not to litigate. And if you are in litigation, you agree to put a hold on that court process to go through collaborative divorce. And you agree to have full disclosure. There's no hiding information. There's no struggle to get documents or financials, having to issue subpoenas or discovery. All of this is full disclosure and exchange of information, and everyone comes to the table to brainstorm and come up with solutions. And so I think those are the big differences, the main characteristics of each of those options.
Great explanation. Tell me why the process will matter, right? The process itself that you choose can make a big difference in the outcome.
Absolutely. And I will say this from my experience as a litigator, as a mediator, as a person who acts as that neutral, and as a collaborative family law attorney. I think the process you choose to resolve your legal disputes, your family law issues matters, because part of an attorney's job is not to look at the right now. We want to look at a whole global view perspective, and how are the decisions you make today going to affect you and your family, your finances in 5, 10, 15 years. And so I think the way you approach each process will affect the not only now result, the 5, 10, 15-year result. And I find that with collaborative family law, whether we're looking at the finances, whether we're looking to divide large assets, divide up debt, or look at how are we going to preserve our finances, or what we've worked for our children, all of those different things, I think it helps you focus outside of yourself and in the moment. And so I truly believe working outside the court system is the best option for most families. I always say, what's your best alternative to coming to an agreement? We call it a BATNA in our mediation collaborative world, and your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And that's going to court and having a stranger telling you how and when you're going to see your children and what to do with your money. And a lot of people, when they hear that, they're just thinking, absolutely not. I want to have a say. I want to say how my children are raised. I want to have a say of how I'm going to co-parent. I don't need someone to tell me how to do that. And that really affects which process you use, will affect the not only now result, but 5, 10, 15 years down the road.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think that I think people think sometimes that there's just one way. And I think that's
Mhm.
one of the myths of divorce, right? Is
Oh yeah.
that like you just go to court and you have it done. What other myths are there about divorce that can cause harm?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the myths about divorce is that it has to be a long, drawn out fight to the end. And it doesn't have to be. I think one of those big myths, it has to be a fight, and this is going to ruin my life. And I hear oftentimes, and sometimes it bothers me when people say this to me, but I'll say, this is just one season of your life, right? This is just one chapter. We're working to put a nice tidy bow on the business of this marriage or this co-parenting relationship and set you up for your next season, your next chapter. And I think one of those myths is that it doesn't have to be that horrible drag out fight and you're slinging all the things in a public record. It doesn't not have to be that way. One of the things I often tell my clients from the outset is, we can go to court. I litigated for over a decade. I can do that. We can do that. But you just have to keep in mind that everything's going to be in public record. North Carolina is fully electronic online filing. So those public records are public. Anyone with the internet connection can see that. So let's think about this not just right now, but again in 5 years when your kids are in high school, when they're adults and they're looking on the internet, they will see all of this. I've had that situation happen to me last year where my clients' teenage children logged on to see their parents' divorce filings. And it was a tough conversation my client had to have with the kids. And it's one of those things that it doesn't have to be that way. And I think it really is from the outset knowing, having that knowledge and information about your different options, different processes of figuring out how can we do this in a safe and, protective manner.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about money because that's
Yeah,
always a big, big
yeah,
part of
yeah.
divorce, right?
Oh
So,
yeah.
what early money decisions are going to have the biggest ripple effect? Or what are the things around money that people should think about? I mean, think that people just go immediately to like division of assets, who gets what, but
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more to it that people aren't thinking about.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really try to have clients work on from the beginning before it's even required if we're in litigation or if we're through the collaborative process is working on their own budgets. And that's going to be relevant, especially if spousal support. So I use that as a collective term like for alimony. So for these purposes, I'll just use that term alimony or child support. if if at any point in time those are going to be an issue, I think working on creating your budget is so important. And a lot of times people just don't think about all those other little expenses like during the marriage, did you go and get your hair done every month? Did you get your nails done every other week? What are those other expenses outside of your household bills? And so some of those things I think people to get educated about what their actual expenses are is so important because oftentimes people just say, "Oh, my spouse handled the finances. I know we have these accounts, but they handled paying all the bills." And they come to me from a place of needing that education. And I think that's one of the biggest things that can really spiral because going from one household with that income level, whether it's two income, one income coming in, you're now going into two physically separate households that same level of income has to support. And so it's one of those things where you don't want to bleed into your assets during this period and then not know what you will have or what you need. And maybe learning that a little too late will be the problem or the challenge.
Yeah, and I found in my experience when people are going through a divorce and I ask them to start figuring out what their cash flow is, what's
Yeah.
going to be coming in, what's going to be going out,
Yeah.
they have no idea because they're like, I
Yeah.
don't know, because they're still living in the same house. Things haven't been separated yet. They don't know what it's going to cost them. They have no idea what their rent or mortgage is going to be. They don't know what the utilities are going to be. They have no idea. It's so hard. Um,
Right.
but that is a great place to start and think about even before you start thinking about division of assets. Like, how am I going to live? What is my lifestyle
Yeah.
going to be? And then a lot of times they're
Yeah.
taking a step back lifestyle wise because it's like you said, there's two incomes supporting one household. And now you're going to have, or sorry, the income
Yeah,
can be one or two, but that number of
right.
income supporting one household, and now that number of income is going to support two households. So it's a
Oh, yeah.
step back in lifestyle, and that's hard for people to do. So money is a big part of the divorce process, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
So let's talk about the cost of fighting to win, because I feel like that's what
Yes.
drags court cases on. That is what costs so much, but
Mhm.
it also costs in emotions and in relationships and families, right? So talk to
Mhm.
us more about that.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the obvious cost, like the money, the hard and fast dollars and cents. I I guess I haven't heard this a lot, but I'll say I feel like I'm an outlier because I think with litigation, the only people win are the lawyers because we know that process is out of your control in terms of a timeline. We know that once the court has your case, you have to appear in court. There's no I'm the attorney of record. I'm not going to show up because I haven't been paid. We can't do that ethically. We can't. So those attorneys' costs, I personally believe in litigation, the attorneys are the ones who win because they have to appear. We have an ethical obligation, and that bill is going back to that client at some point or another. So that cost can spiral out of control. I've had cases that have gone on years after people have been legally divorced and we're working on asset division or spousal support, and it gets to the point where we have five figure attorney fee accounting to factor in, did this come from a marital asset, was this your post separation bill you paid, how is this going to be paid? So that's the most obvious expense, but the emotional toll, I think the emotional expense is one that people don't really think about too often. In the instance I described earlier, where my client had to figure out how to talk to their two teenagers about the things that were in the court filings stated about their co-parents' affair and the details about that, and that they had to learn about that by searching on the court website. And that was something that I just, I had so much empathy for my client having to make those, have those conversations, but it was something that can be avoided, quite honestly. It definitely could be avoided. And so that emotional toll, like that's one example. Another big drain is just the toll of going through litigation. You're taking time off work. Maybe you have to take time away from kids if they're younger. Who's picking them up from school? However am I going to arrange that? I'm running from one place to the next to the next. There's that emotional, also physical toll, quite also. And it just wears on people, that mental drain of having to constantly be on alert of defending yourself, getting that, your litigation hat on for court and being that aggressive mindset, having that aggressive mindset and perspective when you walk through those courthouse doors. And I think all of that just, one, is difficult in and of itself, but let's have that going for 18 months. That's the piece where I think the time expense really, really affects people because it's out of your control. Whether you're at the mercy of the courts, whenever the judge assigned to your case is available, well, what if a judge retires or is not reelected, or for some reason it is off the bench? Well, now you have to wait for a new judge to be assigned. And all of that time is gone. Time that you could have with your children, time you could have with, I guess strengthening your parent-child relationship, lost opportunities if you have other employment opportunities, ways to excel. Some attorneys will say, don't take that job because we still need you to be a dependent spouse. So you get spousal support. So you get that alimony. So we can get you your attorney fees recouped. And so there's so many expenses that are just beyond the dollar and cents with litigation that I don't see a lot of people, one, talk about it, and two, actually consider when trying to figure out what is the best process to resolve these issues.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you're talking about is being stuck in reactive decision making,
Mhm.
right? People are just reacting to the things that are happening, and
Yeah,
it takes you away from intentional restructuring, which I think if
right.
you look at mediation or collaboration, I think that's more intentional restructuring than reactive decision making.
And I love that you use that term because I have a little post-it on my computer monitor, and it's essentially my whole perspective is that we are restructuring your family unit. We're not destroying it. And so
Mhm.
that's something I love to have here as a constant reminder because it's why I do what I do and why I do it, how I do it, because we're just restructuring this unit. Whether it's physically restructuring into two separate households, figuring out how the finances are going to work for those two separate units from the one. That's what we're working on. We're restructuring how and when you see your children based on your needs, based on their needs. Quite honestly, that's the focus when I see anyone with custody concerns. And we're not destroying it. And that's the I think that restructuring that mindset also is key.
Absolutely. And mindset is one of the things that I always bring in mindset,
Mm.
obstacles, things that people have in their heads. And I
Yeah.
think that one of those things is that people associate aggression with strength in divorce. So they think they immediately, if divorce is brought up, there's like power struggle, right? Tell me more about what you think around that as far as mindset goes and how that plays in.
I think that is a huge factor in how, let's say, we tie up this season of people's lives, these relationships, because so many times I have people, even if they, are cold calling and wanting to set up an appointment and say, I need a bulldog attorney. I need someone who's going to fight for me in court, X, Y, and Z. And I will meet with them and I reframe that mindset and I talk through them through all of the options. One, because in North Carolina, we're ethically obligated to discuss all the different ways of dispute resolution. And two, because it doesn't have to be that way. And I think when people just have that automatic mindset of adversarial aggression, power, I need to have the power, I think that prevents them from thinking about the other options and thinking, I could have a say in how this ends up, not a judge in a black robe sitting on a bench, a higher seat than everybody in the courtroom. And I think when we talk about the different options and think about, let's say, collaborative family law, everyone needs to come to that literal table to the point where I use a rounded table, nothing with sharp like the corner edges, because we're working together literally as a team to figure this out. And it gives you so much ownership of the resolution that when I describe that to people, they think, wow, I didn't realize it could be this way. And I think that is one of the most important things is working on that shift of going positionally to let's look at what all of our needs are and what needs are not being met and what can we do to make sure everyone's needs are met. Again, with the confines of maybe a limited pot of assets, but we could do that. And so I think that shift in that mindset has to happen from the outset. And I will say, I love those legal shows on TV, but those don't help. You know, seeing The Good Wife or Law and Order. I mean, they're great for entertainment purposes, but that's not how it really is.
Yeah. Those are there specifically for entertainment and they're
Yeah.
creating literally drama, which is what you don't
Hmm.
want.
Hmm.
All right, let's hear
Absolutely.
something about your book, End Your Marriage
Yeah.
Peacefully. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So a little over a year ago, but probably like 13 and a half months ago, I had this idea as I have been doing collaborative family law as the primary focus about, let's say 85% of my practice. I realized that there are tons of resources for attorneys out there. There's so many resources, trainings, associations, groups, internationally, nationally, locally for attorneys, but what is out there for people? If they're trying to figure out or learn about the processes we talked about, what are their options? And I didn't see that there was a resource out there for people going through this and being able to educate themselves. And we talked about that. That's probably one of the biggest things that I would tell people is even if you're considering a legal separation, considering divorce, learn, get the information you need about it so you can make that right decision. And so I wanted people to learn about alternative dispute resolution, different ways of resolving your divorce, your property division, your alimony, child support, all of that without having to go to court. And so that was kind of how this brainchild came to be, End Your Marriage Peacefully. And I wanted to make sure people had an idea of what each scenario, each process looks like. And so one of my favorite chapters in the book is kind of like a choose your own adventure. I love those books when I was a child. And so I thought this would be a great way to have an example scenario and see it play out in these basic these basic ways to resolve these disputes, whether it's through court and litigation, whether we're going to mediation, whether you choose to do collaborative family law. And I obviously talk a lot about collaborative family law and that paradigm shift, that mindset shift, because I think it is the best option. Quite honestly, I do think it's one of the most cost effective options. It saves people a lot of time. I've had a collaborative divorce conclude within 3 months, whereas we wouldn't even get started with a first court date in 3 months if it were in litigation. And so I hope it gives people an eye opening perspective of different ways that we can resolve a marital relationship, co-parenting relationship, and how to move forward with peace. Because ultimately, I would hope, I think, and I hope that's what people really want to achieve.
Yeah. I love that. I love the choose your own adventure part of it because then you can see like
Yeah.
this, if I did that, if I did that, like the idea of what could happen. Obviously, everybody's going to be different.
Right. Right.
Now, I want to mention one more thing because you mentioned legal separation and we haven't even touched
Yeah.
on that. Can you just
Yeah.
give a short, I don't want to get too far into it, but just give us a short description of what that is?
Yeah, so this is part of the part where it's more state specific, but in North Carolina, and the last I looked at other states, I think it's still a majority of states have a legal separation period requirement before you can file for divorce. I think the shortest I've seen would be about 6 months, but North Carolina, you have to be legally separated for at least 1 year, so we say a year and a day, before you can file for a no-fault divorce. And legal separation, two things have to happen. You live separate and apart, so you physically have to live in two separate addresses, two separate domiciles, and one or both spouses have to have the intent or the mental state to no longer hold yourselves out as a married couple, no longer go out to dinner, date nights, family vacations together, things like that. And so that it's a two step type test, if you will. And so that first step of actually legally separating is really hard for people. We've talked about the financial constraints. And so that I always say legal separation and divorce because at least in North Carolina, that divorce it can happen once you meet those statutory requirements of separate year and a day and don't resume your marital relationship for that time period.
Great. Thank you for explaining that. I wanted to be sure we mentioned it
Yeah.
since you briefly
Yeah.
touched on it. So tell
Yeah.
us who needs to find you. Obviously, North Carolina is the state that you're licensed to
Yeah.
practice law in.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, honestly, and this is the one thing I absolutely love about collaborative family law. I can do that for anyone who is a North Carolina resident. It doesn't have to be limited to where I physically am located. We can do collaborative law virtually. I've done it through Zoom, through Microsoft Teams, even though I don't really prefer that method, but it can be done virtually, it can be done in person. I'm not constrained to my county. And that's one of those things with litigation. that there's another cost, more in the more rural areas where there are less attorneys. We call them legal deserts here in North Carolina. We have 100 counties, and there are some counties that have two licensed attorneys, one licensed attorney. And to me, that
Wow.
limits a person. And those practitioners are commonly what we call generalists. They do a general practice because they have to meet the needs for that community. But if you are looking for someone who's experienced, who's trained, who has those years of high level practice, you may have to go with someone who's not physically located where you live. And so with collaborative family law, that's one of the greatest things. I'm not constrained to my county or the surrounding counties. And then people charge for traveling outside of county or to different courthouses. My local courthouse is a block and a half down the street, but if I'm going to Asheville, North Carolina, that's almost 3 hours away. And that again, that's billable time for a lot of attorneys. And so I'm open to anyone in North Carolina. If anyone is interested about collaborative family law, they can find me on social media, on my website. We do virtual appointments, in-person appointments, and I really try to meet the client where they are and what fits best for them, and try to tailor whatever representation we do to help fit what works for them and their lifestyle.
Wonderful. And how can people find you, or where can they find you, I should say?
Yeah. So I would say the best option would be on my website. And I do have a free guide to help people with like the first 10 basic steps if you're thinking about a divorce. It's www.lawofficeofmpp.com. And on that main website, there is an informational intake form that you can fill out. And then there's another tab that has free guide, and you can put your information there and get that downloadable like handout, if you will. And those are two great ways. Social media on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn.
Great. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise with
Yeah,
us.
thank you
And
for
I have a
having me.
closing nugget for everyone. Strength isn't about escalation, it's about clarity. The most powerful move in a hard season is choosing a process that protects your future. And I'm going to add Manisha's closing nugget, which is you're restructuring your family unit, not destroying it. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Real Money, Real Life. Want to see what's blocking you from financial confidence or discover your money personality? Head to the resources page at lindagriz.com for our free quizzes. That's LINDAGRIZ.com/resources. If you're loving what you're learning, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more people find these conversations. This show is hosted and produced by Linda Grizely Ventures, LLC. Linda Grizely, that's me, is an investment advisor representative of Nectarine, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Linda Grizely Ventures, LLC is separate and unaffiliated with Nectarine. The views expressed on this show are those of the individuals expressing them and do not necessarily reflect the views of Linda Grizely, Linda Grizely Ventures, LLC, or Nectarine. Guests on the podcast may express opinions or discuss financial strategies that are their own and should not be considered recommendations or personalized financial advice. This podcast is provided for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be construed as personalized investment advice or a solicitation to buy or sell any securities or other products. Listeners should consult their own financial, legal, or tax professionals regarding their specific situation. Please visit hellonectarine.com and lindagriz.com for all relevant disclosures.